Hello everyone and welcome back to another edition of the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, brought to you as always by the GSMC Sports Network. My name is Christopher Shepard. Thank you all for joining me here. Happy Friday to you all. It's our last show here of the week. We have a lot to go through to conclude the week and get you all prepared for the weekend in both the NFL and college football. Something that I like to do, and I think I'm going to continue to do as both the NFL and college football seasons go on, is look at some of the best games from each week in games which I believe will have the biggest fantasy implications. So not necessarily the best games, but just games that I feel like will affect and impact your fantasy football decisions for that specific week. We'll do it today as well in both the NFL and college football. And since we aren't necessarily a weekend show, I do want to get a little bit of input to you guys in terms of Sunday night football as well. And then we also will have a high risk, high reward segment in terms of players who I think can be boom or bust this week. But before we get into any of that, I do want to remind you guys to consider liking, subscribing, and following the show and the network as a whole. Also, you guys have been doing a fantastic job of this as well. Keep on making yourselves available to it. The Super Chat, Super Thanks, and Super Stickers features here on YouTube are a great way to interact with the show, a great way to get your comments on air. If you really want your comments to get on air, use the Super Chat feature where you can leave a tip or donation as well, and it will pop up immediately on my screen and I will shout you out as well as your comment. So if you're interested in doing that, any way you want to, question, comment, or concern, it is greatly appreciated by both me, my fellow podcasters, this show especially, and the network. So it's just something for you to consider. But without further ado, let us jump right into today's show. Starting off with the aforementioned segment that I wanted to start today's show with, the NFL games that I believe will have the biggest fantasy implications for this week. Now, like I said, these aren't the marquee matchups. Some of them are of the week, but they're just the ones that I feel like will reveal a lot of different storylines about certain players in terms of their fantasy implications. And so, without further ado, let's jump right in with the first game of the week that we'll be talking about, and we'll be talking about a lot throughout the show. That is the Sunday night football matchup is Bills-Ravens. And I think that the big question that I gather from this game is, will the QBs carry the day? Because I think about this game, and I think about how both of these offenses will go up against these defenses, because there are a lot of questions in those units and not necessarily about these offensive units. On the Bills side, their offense is looking to be clicking. Everything seems to be going right for it. Josh Allen is playing the best football of his career. His many role player weapons are stepping up into their new roles as either a wide receiver one like Khalil Shakir or a guy like James Cook who's just getting a lot more touches in this offense, and it's paying dividends for them. Joe Brady, my early coordinator pick of the year, if that is such a thing, because of the way he's truly impacted this offense. The Ravens side of things, their offense hasn't necessarily looked as good, but from what I saw of them last week and what King Henry did to the Dallas Cowboys, I'm now buying into what this offense can become. Because I was a very skeptical person when it came to Derrick Henry's value to this team and what he would be able to bring to it. But what he showed me last week, albeit against a very porous Cowboys run defense, did prove that at least he has some merit in this offense. But when I look at the defensive side of the ball, the Bills, on one hand, are doing more with less, but it very well could come tumbling down for this defense as well. Up to this point, they played very well, but they really haven't had much issue with any specific team. Yes, their performance against the Dolphins was perhaps one of the most impressive defensive performances of the season because of the way they limited both Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle in that game. But I kind of take that with a grain of salt because it was what was going to be expected for that defense in the game. It was what they needed to do in order to mitigate for some deficiencies there as well. But the deficiencies are still there. Their linebacker core is still weakened because of the loss of Milano. Terrell Bernard got injured during the season, kind of playing through that a little bit. So that's something to note. So this game is really going to be dictated by which QB takes over. I'm more confident in that being Josh Allen, just from what I've seen, as he's both a runner and a passer this season. So I would say if you're a fantasy football manager and you have your pick of guys at the QB position that you want to start, Josh Allen would be the play here should he be on your roster. But Lamar as well, look for him to try and affect this game more as a rusher than as a passer, because I feel like that's the best way to attack this Bills defense thus far, because I feel like the Bills secondary is its strength, but you can attack the linebackers in many different ways. Stretch them out, stretch the field a little bit. So look for Lamar to do that with his legs. But overall, I think this game will be really intriguing in terms of which QB really is going to take over this game. And for now, I think it's Josh Allen. But just because of Lamar's dual threat ability, I think that this could be an interesting QB conundrum for fantasy football managers everywhere. But the next game I want to talk about is kind of an under-the-radar game. We talked about this game a little bit in yesterday's show, but not to the extent I want to get into now. And that is Rams-Bears. And the question that I have about this game is, what with the depleted nature of the Rams roster, yes, they eked out a win against San Francisco against all odds. Can a Bears defense that seems to be going a little bit too under the radar really take the advantage in this game? And if so, will the Bears defense be a popular play for fantasy football managers? Because like I said, defenses, this is the year of them, right? But a lot of people are still looking to stream their defenses for such a game. And so if you're kind of looking through the market for your defense right now, look to the Bears. I'm not saying that the Rams can't, pull off a miracle again, but I wasn't necessarily as impressed with the Rams offense, more so than I was disappointed in the 49ers in that game closing it out, because the 49ers had a unique opportunity to close out that game, but they had a couple missed field goals. They didn't click late in the game in the red zone, so that was more of the reason why the Rams had that opportunity. I wasn't impressed. Yes, Kyron Williams had perhaps his best game, but that was kind of a force. He needed to have a game like that because none of those offensive weapons really had anything going. And for what it's worth, I still think guys like Tutu Atwell, Colby Parkinson, and DeMarcus Robinson can add value. But against a Bears defense that I feel like we're underappreciating right now just because of the deficiencies of their offense, I feel like this game could be more of a defensive slugfest than people think. So look for the Bears to be a sneaky kind of play in terms of what their defense can bring to the table in this game, because I don't necessarily think this game is going to be as high scoring as some people might have expected. The next game is going to be kind of a microcosm of this game. It's going to be a very gritty game, divisional game that I really think a lot of people might not get a lot of answers from in terms of fantasy implications. That's Saints-Falcons. And the reason why this game is so intriguing in terms of fantasy implications is because you're not going to take much from it, right? Because this game could go either way. I think what you want to see out of this game is the things that have been working for this both of these offenses to work in this game as well, because it's a divisional game. Let's say you have Rashid Shaheed and you really think he's a viable wide receiver too for your fantasy team. You want to see him and Derek Carr connecting a couple of deep balls. If you own Alvin Kamara, you want to see him continue to be the focal point of that Saints offense. And if you're an owner of, say, Drake London or Bijan Robinson, you want Bijan Robinson's touches to warrant more yardage, and you want Drake London to continue being a threat all over the field, whether it be on early downs or in the red zone, because that's the things that have worked for the Saints and the Falcons thus far. And if they don't work in this game, expect this game to be a snooze fest, especially in terms of fantasy perspective. Because if this game plays out like your typical NFC South game, nothing can be made of stats-wise any way any of these players can affect your team, because it's gritty, then it's not like you're going to learn much about who you want on your roster rather than, it being a slugfest because it's a divisional game. So this is like a weird one because I'm excited to see how both these offenses look in a divisional game. Because it's a divisional game, I'm not placing too much weight and emphasis on any fallout from underperformance, if that makes sense, from this game. But this game is still one that I'm kind of keeping an eye on and monitor to see who might be the best performers from it. But the last game, this game obviously should have been on this list immediately. It's not a biased thing, I promise, but this game is perhaps the biggest one in terms of not just fantasy implications, but NFC implications, prove-it implications, and things of that nature. It's Seahawks-Lions. And this quote-unquote NFC rivalry really has been one of the most entertaining to watch over the past couple of years. And I know what you guys are thinking. This game seems like it could be more of a mismatch than people think because the Lions just feel like they have more weapons at their disposal right now, and it feels like this could be their coming out party, whereas the Seahawks look very depleted on the offensive side of the football, and their defense hasn't really been tested up to this point. That just adds to the quote-unquote pageantry of this game. It just adds more intrigue, more hype to see which players will step up. Because through 3 weeks, yes, the Seattle offense hasn't had its full bill of health at its disposal, but it still has found different weapons that it can utilize. For example, Jack Smith-Njigba is off to a pretty good start, and Zach Charbonnet had one of his best games as a Seahawk last week. And on the Lions side of things, you got to appreciate the fact that guys like David Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs are getting so many touches as running backs who last year may have been hindered by the overall versatility of the Lions offense. But this game, expect both of these offenses to come out guns a-blazing. Not necessarily the Seahawks. I think that in terms of guns a-blazing, I mean more dink and dunk, trying to get the short to intermediate areas of the field exploited. And for the Lions, I expect Jared Goff to look himself again. I expect him to hit all areas of the field. I expect him to utilize Amon-Ra St. Brown more. We'll have to see if Sam Laporta looks good for this game to start. But overall, it's going to be a fun game. Expect a shootout. Expect high fantasy numbers all around by all skill position players concerned. But let me know what you think in the comments, because there are certainly a lot of games I could have missed that you guys might have wanted to talk about. But that'll just about do it for this opening segment. Coming up next, we take a little respite from our implications in terms of games around the NFL and college football to look at some high-risk, high-reward players for your fantasy squad for this upcoming week. You definitely don't want to miss. We'll be right back after this short break.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. 'Cause everybody in the